I know you were expecting Commissioner Beth Bai, but she is unavailable today. So I am filling in for Commissioner Bai. My name is Rachel Leventhal-Weiner, and I'm our Chief Research and Planning Officer at the Office of Early Childhood. I'm on the Data Governing Board, so I'm familiar to many. And I just wanted to welcome everyone. This is our last quarterly meeting, our last executive board meeting of 2021. We have accomplished a lot this year, transfer of leadership, a lot of formalization of processes and documentation. So there's been a lot of really great progress of this group, and there's a lot to be proud of. And we have a lot of really great topics to talk through today on today's agenda. But before we get started, because this is a public meeting, we should pause and see if there's anybody present who would like to offer a public comment. You can unmute yourself or raise your virtual hand. Seeing none, we will proceed. That's okay. We're good to proceed.
Yep, we're good.
Great. Okay. So now Katie will do the roll call.
All right. So Rachel Leventhal-Weiner for Commissioner Bai.
Present.
Dante Bartolomeo. Is there anybody here for representative?
This is apprenticeship week, so she has many activities. So I am here representing the Department of Labor.
Okay, great. Lloyd Blanchard.
Here.
Deidre Gifford.
Present.
Ken Kluchnick for Dr. Gates. Not yet. Scott Gall.
Here.
Yvonne Klein.
I am here.
Larson.
Here.
Ajit Gopalakrishnan for Commissioner Russell Tucker.
Present.
Witness.
Here.
Kelly Valeries. And Mike Williams.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Back to you, Rachel.
So today we have a presentation from folks from Child and Health Development Institute. And so I'd like to introduce the discussion of the Children's Behavioral Health Plan and Deputy Commissioner Williams. We haven't met, but thank you so much for making this introduction of our colleagues.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And what a timely agenda item to have before us. I'm sure you all have followed what our children are experiencing during the pandemic as it relates to their mental health and their need for more services due to the acute nature of mental health problems that we're seeing in our system. We are fortunate in Connecticut to have what I always say one of the best and well-resourced mental health system for children in the country. There's only a couple of the states that will rival us, but when you look around Connecticut, we do really, really well, and we've been that way for quite some time. What we also have been doing since Sandy Hook as a result of that tragedy is working on creating a better system by assuring that we have good coordination, integration, outcomes, and just an infrastructure to move our system forward. We had a lot of stops and starts, a lot of challenges to get there, but we are on our way there now. And with the help of CHDI and Jeff Vanderploeg, who have become kind of the appendage of DCF, we have really begun to move the system forward. Jeff has been instrumental, and his organization has been instrumental as a think partner in helping us in the design of this plan that he'll talk about. And now they have become an operational partner in helping us in the implementation stages of it. So I won't take any more of his thunder. Now I'll introduce you all to Dr. Jeff Vanderploeg, a good friend and colleague and a great organization for us to work with. Jeff.
Well, I really appreciate that, Michael. Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be with you here today. And Scott, if you don't mind pulling up the slides, I would let's just go ahead and launch into it because I know that you have other things on your agenda today. Thank you for that introduction. yeah, we're pleased to partner with DCF and also a number of other state agencies around children's health and well-being, and particularly their behavioral health needs. And as Michael mentioned, what a timely moment in time to be talking about this, because the need out there is significant. We do have a really strong and robust system, but like all systems, there are always opportunities for us to improve. And we are fortunate to be guided by a children's behavioral health plan that was developed in 2014 coming out of the Sandy Hook tragedy. And that plan has remained relevant over the last several years and has continued to give us insights into where we need to put our energies and investments into improving the system. So I'm going to be focusing most of my attention on activities that we've been engaged in over the last few months in particular, as DCF has made use of mental health block grant dollars and some ARPA dollars to make available some project management support to move forward implementation of certain goals and objectives from that plan. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So I want to cruise probably through a couple of the work groups and spend a little bit more time on our data integration work group. But before I do that, just by way of a little bit more background, I mentioned that the plan was developed in 2014. It's overseen by an implementation advisory board that's comprised of 12 state entities, as well as a few other community stakeholders and partners around that table. The plan itself was developed in 2014 with extensive input from families and communities and providers and the research community. So we really felt like for the last several years, it's remained a relevant plan, because the process of getting to where we got with the goals and objectives included feedback from so many important stakeholders. You can see here that in the 2013 original legislation calling for the development of the plan, and then a renewal legislation in 2015 that named a number of state entities that would be responsible for overseeing its implementation. And so you can see in the middle there, the behavioral health plan legislation included DCF, DSS, State Department of Ed, OEC. You can see the list here, and it includes a few other other state partners, including Insurance Department, Office of the Child Advocate, Office of the Healthcare Advocate, and then also the Commission on Women, Children, and Seniors. And then there are a few of those that are common across the behavioral health plan, but are also partners in the P20 WIN initiative, and that next bullets that includes DCF, DSS, SDE, and OEC. As I mentioned, the work group activities started around June, and we're looking and hoping to wrap up the work group activities this month with reports coming out before the end of the calendar year. They are supported by COVID relief funds and mental health block grant dollars. And we wanted to pick up and align with the recommendations, but also make sure it was relevant to what the current needs were in the system, as well as federal funding opportunities that were out there from ARPA and other sources, as well as state funding priorities. Next slide. So DCF contracted with us to do the project management behind the work groups, to pull together the background information and to facilitate the meetings, and also kind of do some of the legwork on writing up recommendations. There are 4 work groups that were, well, 3 actually originally selected, and a 4th one that grew out of the 3rd group. So the original set of 3 were alternative payment methodologies, or what sometimes referred to as value-based care. And also we included in that measurement-based care, since we believe that measurement-based care and alternative payment methodologies often walk hand in hand. The 2nd work group on data integration, which I'll spend more time on today. And then a 3rd group on behavioral health, urgent care, and crisis stabilization. And the idea here being that if we want to address the need of children presenting to the emergency department with primary behavioral health concerns, we need to have a viable alternative available for them other than the ED that addresses their needs and can help link them up with the system. It's something other than a general medical emergency department. As we got into that 3rd conversation around urgent care and crisis stabilization, the group of several members of which were right in the middle of the emergency department surge, and so they requested that another group be formed on short-term solutions. The concern was that urgent care or crisis stabilization would take a while to get up and running. So what can we do today? What can we do next week? And so we pivoted and opened up a 4th work group where we focused on short-term solutions. And I can share a few of those recommendations with you. As I mentioned, we met from June through November. The short-term group That only met really 4 times in the month of October, so the cadence there was quite a bit quicker. And our participants were providers, both hospital-based and community-based, as well as our state agency partners and some other advocates. Next slide. All right, I'm not gonna read all this to you, but generally speaking, the way we approached this was to look at national best practices as well as current activities going on in the state. We did that for all of our work groups. We did not want to reinvent the wheel. We wanted to pick up on things that were already in place, things that were already working, but also tap into best practices and evidence-based practices that are occurring in other states for each of those work groups. You can see there the list of short-term solutions work groups. I wanted to at least put those up on the slide for you to be able to take a look at, because these are the things that that group of people said, we need to do this. These are the activities we need to engage in right away. Largely around the behavioral health ED crisis, but a few other things as well that seemed relevant and important for that group. So I won't spend a lot of time besides just to highlight that the categories are, how do we keep more kids out of the emergency department who don't need that level of care to begin with? And a lot of focus on the role of mobile crisis there. For those kids who do show up to an emergency department, but are not recommended to go to an inpatient level of care, how do we quickly discharge them from the ED environment out to the community? The role of inpatient beds also came up, as did the role of discharging kids from inpatient in a timely way back to the community. And then finally, another group on policy and other considerations. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about data integration in more detail. So our goal with data integration likewise was to review existing plans and activities in Connecticut, but also national best practices. We also came into that work group knowing enough about P20 WIN to be dangerous, but we learned more as we got going, because one of our goals from the beginning was to broaden state agency participation in P20 WIN. And we ended up learning a lot in our first couple of work group meetings from Scott and others, and ultimately landed on a recommendation to do just that. And then we also spent the last half of the work group meetings talking about system level indicators. So essentially, what kind of data would we want to be able to have our hands on to know that our children's behavioral health system is working well? And that's not necessarily child and family outcomes. It's things like ED admission rates and inpatient discharge delays, many things that you get out of the Medicaid data system, but we also had an interest in being able to look at those across payers so that all children, regardless of where they're or how they're insured, we had a sense about how our behavioral health system was working as a whole. We've had 5 meetings. We have another meeting this week. It'll be our 6th. The first couple of meetings were on P20 WIN and 500 familiar faces, and then the last 3 that we've had were on those system indicators. A few challenges that we identified. First of all, we anticipate that P20 WIN, we see the potential in P20 WIN, but we also understand from talking with Scott and others that P20 WIN is still in the process of moving forward towards a gold standard of implementation. So we wanted to position our recommendations in such a way that we recognize P20 WIN's potential and could be an advocate for strengthening it, for expanding its resources and expanding its capacity. But in general, I would say that when we learned about P20 WIN, it was a no-brainer for our work group. We saw the potential for being able to look at cross-system outcomes for children who are involved in the behavioral health system, and felt like this addressed a lot of longstanding concerns around data sharing agreements that are really difficult for people outside of state government to push through. And it did seem like the platform in place for P20 WIN had really strong potential, and we're far ahead of any other options that we were aware of. And so it was pretty much an easy recommendation for our group to put forward. And we, in fact, got unanimous support for it when it was raised in one of our meetings. When it comes to the behavioral health system indicators, we decided we wanted to position some of those data elements to identify what we knew to be pain points in the system, so that we could quickly inform decision makers about where we needed to be focusing our attention. Let's go to the next slide. So here's what we crafted in terms of recommendation language for P20 WIN. That first part, that all agencies that are supporting children's behavioral health in the state participate in P20 WIN. and that the Children's Behavioral Health System direct its data requests, including cross-system data requests, through the P20 WIN initiative in accordance with policies and procedures adopted by you all as the P20 WIN governing bodies. And then the part 2 of that recommendation is that the P20 WIN initiative receive resources that enhance its capacity in such a manner to address those requests in a timely way. So we didn't want to say, oh, we're going to start sending enormous amounts of data requests over to P20 WIN without also acknowledging that they may not have the capacity to address all the requests that come in, and we want to make sure that they receive the resources that they need to be able to address requests. So I will stop right there and just kind of get us focused on the questions. And Scott and I and others helped me put these questions together. But as you look at that recommendation language, just generally speaking, as an executive board, does that look like it's in alignment with what you would like to see? Do you support that recommendation and endorse our work group's work and recommendations having to do with P20 WIN? Secondly, which of these 12 state agencies supporting behavioral health are customers and which are participants? And that I'm going to let Scott probably dive into that one the most, because I know that there's some technicalities in the language that you all have been working through as a group that are important to work through. And then, the bar is kind of in the way, and I can't read the third questions, but I think it's generally what other concerns or considerations do you have in mind? So anybody who wants to jump in on any one of those questions, let's go ahead and just do that.
If I could, I just want to jump in and say, I think that, Jeff, I want to thank you for your presentation, and I think it sort of tees up our discussion we'll be having in a little while around big agency questions and agency motivation for sharing data and information, especially thinking about what you mentioned in your presentation about data that you want to have or would like to have, but maybe doesn't exist quite yet. So I think that this sort of sets our minds in the right headspace to be having that conversation. And I think this is a great place for us to begin that discussion.
Yeah, and I think particularly when we were talking about the behavioral health system indicators that folks would like to see to know that the system is working, there was a recognition that some of those data elements existed. And I didn't have the time to lay all that out, but there was a very specific set of indicators that the group identified, some of which existed with data sources that we already have, and some of which were aspirational and will require us to have a data development agenda as a state so that we can begin to collect some of those things. Now, that may or may not be the work of P20 WIN, but we would need to work through with the state agencies or other relevant entities where those data points would come from.
Hi, Jeff. Is it possible to make a distinction between what P20 WIN does and my CT portal we've been hearing about is going to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a better question for Scott or somebody from the P20 WIN that would understand those distinctions. Scott, do you want to tackle that one?
I'll give my understanding, although I think that there's other folks in this group who also probably have a better understanding of this than I do. But I think the understanding I have is that MyCT is essentially for an individual's access to their own data. Hence the name, it's MyCT, it's my data. And so if you're engaging with state services, it enables you to, get through the process of going through eligibility faster and easier if you're able to access your own information and sort of repurpose that. It is similar but different than P20 WIN in that it does not facilitate the sharing of data across agencies. And so that's sort of the intention for P20 WIN, is that you're able to share data across agencies in a large scale manner rather than providing each individual access to their own data. So if you wanted to, I think, and again, we'll get into this in the next discussion, but if you're looking at questions, for example, where there's overlap in services, or you wanted a system level view, that is not what I think MyCT is proposing to deliver. It's helping individuals access and engage with the state online for delivery of services, but I don't think it's answering those kinds of questions. I could be mistaken about that too, and I certainly would welcome correction on that.
Thanks.
Scott, it's Deidre Gifford. You're exactly correct in the way that you've characterized it. I think P20 Win will be extremely helpful for the sort of behind the scenes functionality that we hope MyCT will have, which would be a more comprehensive view of an individual's set of services that they're participating in and potentially have access to. So there will undoubtedly be some data sharing issues that come up because now that information is kind of, in its own vault. And the initial plan for MyCT is to send the individual to those vaults, if you will. But I think we're all hoping that eventually there'd be a more integrated view at an individual level that would facilitate them both getting and keeping benefits.
Okay.
So just a question for the group. How do you, looking at particularly part one of the recommendation, this work group is saying, we want to see more data requests go through P20 Win. As an executive committee, how do you feel P20 Win is positioned to accommodate that kind of a recommendation?
You're saying all state agencies, Jeff, or all agencies?
Well, I'm just trying to envision, an integrated set of state agencies who are all kind of working in the behavioral health arena for children. If there was a common set of questions or interests in data that's merged across different data systems and those requests were to come in through P20 Win, are you all comfortable with that? Because I can think of, if you start to continue conversation with a group of participants that have been involved in this work, they may have a lot of questions that they want to start pushing over to P20 Win and say, what does, for children who are identified as having behavioral health needs, how do their graduation rates look and what does their enrollment rates in higher education look like over time? That's something that could come up. And dozens of other examples that could become questions that start rising up to P20 Win. Does the initiative have the capacity to kind of handle that?
We got a question in the chat about which state agencies are part of this.
I'm going to click through to the list, which is earlier here. And since Jeff prompted this in the earlier discussion, I think there is a distinction. Some of these agencies are not agencies that would be in sort of the P20 Win language participating agencies because they're not agencies that collect or have the authority to share data. And so the 12 here is sort of a mix of agencies that might make requests for data and agencies that would provide data. And I think the ones that are bolded, DCF, DSS, CST, and OAC are sort of already part of P20 Win. And then the list here is the ones part of the behavioral health plan that have not, that are not part of the system currently.
Okay, and then Ajit is asking if we can also then now see the recommendation.
May I ask, as Ajit is reading up on the recommendation, I have a clarifying question. So Jeff, when I like the idea that there's sort of a routine set of questions that you're revisiting and challenging agencies to find ways to connect information. Do you anticipate that the questions will change wildly from year to year, or do you think this is sort of one of those efforts where you begin with the core set of questions and then you sort of tweak and modify as the years pass?
I think it's a great question. I would imagine or envision or hope that it would be the latter. That it would be we have a sense about what are the most important questions that we're interested in as a group, we're starting with the population of children with behavioral health needs, that we have a set of questions that rely on cross-agency data merging, and that we would ask, for example, that could we run those data on an annual basis. And then there very likely will be some one-offs. I think some of it depends on where the questions are coming from. I think if you have a governance structure in place where requests for data are kind of coming up through a structure where those interests can be vetted and determined whether they're realistic, then I think the likelihood of getting really sort of wild one-offs will be diminished. But I think if we have a structure and governance where we can talk through and vet some of the requests that come up as ideas, then I think it will make it a much more manageable. And I would like to see it reported out on a routine basis so that we can monitor trends over time in that data. In order to do that, we have to have consistency in the question being asked.
Sure. This is something that P20 Win already sort of manages. There are some routine data matches that happen and have been ongoing for a number of years. And there's been conversation amongst folks at the table as well about establishing new connections. So I think that this is something that we'd have to discuss. I don't know if we're going to resolve it today necessarily, but it kind of links us to our future discussion in this conversation about our research agenda, because one of the goals of this group is to in the past the data matching was motivated by the requests that we received. But we, for everyone here, as executives, you have the opportunity to actually, partner with organizations like Jeff and actually use talent that we have to motivate the questions and the data linking that we do. So it doesn't necessarily have to be motivated by questions that come from the outside, but they can be motivated by our own questions. So Ajit, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So now, reacting to recommendation number 1, not sure exactly what this is saying in the sense that the Children's Behavioral Health System direct data requests and associated cross-system data requests. Is that at the exclusion of everything else, or is that limited to behavioral health questions? Because there are so many other sort of behavioral health questions that we all deal with. So I would not want the behavioral health system to be the only conduit for raising questions. So if it's limited to behavioral health issues, then again, maybe that's the beginning of a conversation, but not an overall broad recommendation like this.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think the group of stakeholders who are kind of gathering to talk about issues in the children's behavioral health system will probably they'll probably have some questions and want information about how children are doing, relying on data that's only in the behavioral health system. But then to the extent that some of those questions cross over into other state agencies, so like the example I shared earlier about how do children who have had significant behavioral health system involvement, how do they fare in terms of their high school graduation rates or participation in higher education? I mean, those are the kinds of questions I envision would go to P20 Win, and not necessarily the kinds of questions that exist only within the children's behavioral health system, because presumably you have the data to be able to answer it without going through P20 Win. And then I'm, likely that in all likelihood, there could be a number of other questions. So if you're OEC or you're a community stakeholder group that's really interested in early childhood issues, your questions are going to be very different and may have nothing to do with behavioral health. So really what the recommendation you're looking at here is to say, among those stakeholders in the behavioral health community in Connecticut, they're thinking through how can we use P20 Win as a resource and as a tool to answer cross-agency data questions that are important to us as a stakeholder group. Hopefully that helps explain things a bit.
Yeah, it does. And I think for me, it would be that to refine, I would say that the Children's Behavioral Health System direct data requests and associated cross-system data requests pertaining to children's behavioral health issues through P20 Win. Then I think it makes sense to me.
Okay.
Because there are so many other questions education related that we deal with and the players at the work group are dealing with, that to me would not make sense to route through the behavioral health lens.
So this is Lloyd Blanchard. I don't know if you hear me. Can you hear me? Great. I don't. Let me make sure I'm getting the person. Jeff, this seems to be kind of a general request, as you refer to it here in this part one of your recommendation. And one of the concerns that I have, I represent UConn, by the way, is if you don't know the question that you're trying to ask of the data, then you're just requiring that the data sit there someplace until the question that you have, arises, and then you can ask the data of specific variables, right? We don't want, as UConn, we don't want our student data sitting someplace waiting for someone to figure out what questions they have that may have a link to our students and their graduation and retention rates. I can easily imagine a good study looking at those children who have gone through behavioral health programs. How did they fare in high school, in college, and beyond, right? But the way we have done it to date, so that data just don't sit there from these various institutions, speaking really from higher education standpoint, is the request would come in for specific data, right? We have a study that wants to look at the outcomes of children that have participated in the behavioral health system, high school outcomes, post-secondary outcomes. Then we can provide that data, but please understand that we have to provide it in an anonymous way. So in order for those data to be linked to your children, they have to be someplace matched and provided to you anonymously. And so that's one of the reasons why we can't just provide data to sit and wait for someone to analyze. It has to be matched to the specific need.
Lloyd,
Yeah.
if I could maybe address part of the concern here, so just twofold. So like first, this is not a proposal to have data sort of sit and wait for a request to come in. Definitely, this is not changing any aspect of that. I think the language here that's at the end is so that any request that would come that relates to behavioral health system data that could pertain to the 4 agencies currently that are part of the behavioral health system, that are part of P20 WIN, that would be done in accordance with policies and procedures adopted by the P20 WIN governing board. So it changes, nothing about the current system operation. And I think what I know from participating in the groups that I think the behavioral health plan has, in this case, they have sets of indicators, questions that they're looking at for sort of getting that system point of view that we're just not presenting in that level of depth today. But what they're sort of struggling with is that they don't have a way to make those requests in an easy fashion across agencies. And because some of those agencies are part of P20 WIN now, the potential to add some of those agencies to the system would facilitate their ability to make those requests in the future when, as exactly you said, they are at a point that they've got those questions ironed out and detailed enough, and then it would just go through the exact same policies and procedures that we have today and have used in the past, so that it wouldn't, none of those things would change this, if that makes sense. Does that sort of answer your question?
I didn't have a question. I was
or
hoping
your comment, I guess. It's not a question,
Jeff.
correct? So,
it sounded like I was going in the wrong direction, so I appreciate that, Scott. But okay, I don't really know what the question on the table is then. I was trying to support Jeff by saying this could be good stuff, particularly if you can link behavioral health participation all the way through post-secondary.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. And when you were speaking, I was like, yeah, I think your understanding and my understanding are the same. So I think we're at this stage developmentally right now where the group of stakeholders participating in this work to this point, the only thing that they've determined is that P20 WIN is potentially a valuable resource to them. And so as they continue to work and meet over time, I think that group will begin to devise some more specific data requests. And I think the group understands from talking with Scott and others that it's at that point that you all, as a governing body, would then make those data available to do the merging anonymously and to then return an answer on that request. So yeah, we're very much on the same page, and I think the group of people we've been working with understands that as well.
So, well, and I appreciate that. One of the points you made was return an answer on the question requires capacity at the P20 level, right? So I don't know if that's capacity sort of within Scott's group or generally, right? The request generates a pulling together of various experts to answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
It would be interesting to see how we do that second part, right?
Yeah.
How we answer the question and what resources we use to do so.
Right.
Otherwise, it seems to me that you would simply make a data request that would go back to you and your analysts, and then you would answer the question with the data we provided you. I guess it could be done a couple of different ways.
Yeah, it was always I guess it's been my understanding up to this point that that it would be the former approach, that the Department of Labor staff would be available to do the merging and to answer whatever question's been posed and return the answer, as opposed to returning to an entity like CHDI the data and then having us run the analysis ourselves. I think my understanding, and I could be wrong about this, but my understanding about the value of P20 Win is that it does help to address some of those data sharing agreements and releases that are required for an entity like mine to be involved in receiving those merged data sets to run the analyses ourselves. But you're right, a lot hinges on part 2 of the recommendation, which is, does the P20 Win initiative have resources and support available to answer questions that may begin to come in from either from this group of behavioral health stakeholders or from others.
Well, yeah, I always thought it was to pull your own data down to do your own analysis. But Scott, is there a vision for P20 to gather enough research capacity to answer broad and ranging questions that could come its way?
I think it's probably a mixed approach where some of their questions we'd be able to answer with staff of the system, and some would come externally. And I think that's sort of the mix that we've seen different jurisdictions. And I think the next discussion, when we could dig a little deeper into the learning agenda, that's where hopefully we'll get more precise about what are the kinds of questions that are coming to bear, and what the resources we need to access them, both the types of skills, where folks would sit. So I think what you're asking are the right questions. I think at this point we don't have I should say, I don't have a dedicated answer to it, just because we've got to figure out what some of the questions are first. That is our next agenda topic, I think.
So should we shift gears to the next agenda topic, thinking about those big questions?
It's fine with me.
Fantastic. Thanks. Thank you so much, Jeff, for your
presentation,
and for sparking such a great discussion.
My pleasure. And I'm happy to drop off at this point unless you're expecting me to stay.
I think the choice is yours. We would love to have you as a guest, and we will not be offended if you
I don't want to overstep, because if you have other things, I know I'm not on your executive governing committee, so I don't
but it is a public meeting, so
Okay.
you are welcome.
Well, then I out of interest, I'll stick around and I'll hear what you have to say.
Fantastic.
All right,
we have 19 minutes left together. So shifting gears, one of the goals for today was to be thinking about what we're calling a learning agenda. And we already have a research agenda, and that research agenda we developed back in September of 2020 as we kicked off our statewide longitudinal data system grant that we were awarded. But it's time to revisit that and make sure that we're focusing and prioritizing the right questions. And so one of the goals for today was to actually have a conversation around some of these cross-agency priority questions, and use those priorities to guide the way that we actually put together data requests that sort of serve our own purposes. So one of the goals that we had hoped to accomplish today was to just spark some thoughts among executive board members around your own agency priorities, and then data governing board members are the ones who are going to think about how to make those requests actionable. And those requests could be, one time or ongoing, as we've indicated. So we make sure that the data are being used, and that our plan is to review this learning agenda annually. So this is the very beginning of that conversation that Scott is going to pick up on in a second. We have a special guest to lead that conversation too. So, Scott.
You all have the slide, so I will, in the interest of time, not read the bio for our special guest who will join in a second to help facilitate the discussion for developing this agenda. I'll click, hold on. Just as a refresher and to sort of level set for everyone, we have an existing research agenda. This has been in place for the last year and a half or so. And one thing that a lot of similar systems do is they refresh this on a regular basis. And so we wanted to have a discussion with the executive board to take a look at the research agenda that we have, make sure that the topics are in alignment. We have new agencies that are part of P20 WIN. The world obviously around us has changed in the past year and a half. And so we should make sure, are these the right topics? Are we looking in the right direction, so that as we undertake the work of kind of developing data requests and digging into these in more detail, that we're directionally correct. So this is the existing research agenda. Again, you all have this in your slides. Without going into too much detail, I'll say that all 5 of these topics have either a request or existing analysis that's already underway. So we're making progress on the agenda that we have, as we speak. But we want to make sure that we're looking in the right direction. And again, just I think in the interest of time, I'll kind of skip through this. We are also, building on the existing success that's been put in place through the many people that have, put blood, sweat, and tears into developing P20 WIN over the past several years. And so there's several examples that we can already point to of using the data from the agencies in this request process to of high quality analysis and research by a variety of different actors. So how we can do more of that in the future. And I will then shift to our guest and facilitator, Amy Hahn Nelson, who will talk through a little bit about taking a similar, but I think slightly different approach to developing an agenda that is an agenda for cross-agency requests that we can use, again, to make sure the work we are doing for P20 WIN is on track and is kind of having impact and providing value for the agencies that you all represent.
Great.
Thanks, intro? You're good. Okay. Tell me if you need to click or you need me to click.
Yeah, sounds good. Hi, everyone. The short summary of what I do for a living is I help agencies, governments across the U.S. try to figure out data sharing and how to do it well. And this slide is an important piece of data sharing that people often forget about. We become so embroiled in like the actual governance and the legal agreements that we forget that we're doing all this work for a specific purpose, right? And that purpose is to look across agencies, data share, because we have questions that have to be answered using other agency data, right? So that's at the core of what this is. So this is something that has had localities, large counties, cities for a long time, and in some states, but had not been common practice in the federal government. And so there is a change with some executive orders and guidance that has come out this year under the Biden administration. And so now learning agendas are a thing, and they're required in some places and highly recommended in others. So the questions here are summarized, like what is it our agency needs to do? What do we need to know to do it well or to do it, the best we can? And what do we wish we knew? And often the what do we wish we knew is data that is held by another partner, another agency, someone that is cross-sector from where we are. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit for the next few minutes. Scott, will you advance one slide? So we thought it might be helpful to organize people's thinking with just some framing of kind of short-term, medium-term, and long-term. So think about questions in your own agencies, right? Like what are some short-term things? So I often think about these if anyone has, an analyst background or does a lot of a lot of work with the analytics of your agency. Think of this as like a cross tab, right? Like, what is cross enrollment? How can you count widgets, and how can you make that counting of widgets make more sense and more impactful? So cross enrollment across programs. Are there any people on this call right now who would like to know how many people that are served by your agency are also served by a partner agency? Is that of interest? Yes. It isn't of interest to everyone. In fact, we have sites in our network where they literally create their entire data system just so they can answer this question. A lot of work is done just for this. So you could really focus on this cross-enrollment question and make this the core of your work, for a while and be pretty busy, and it have a big impact on how you make decisions, right? And how you allocate resources, and ultimately how to serve the residents of Connecticut. The other way to think about is this work is medium term, right? So connecting, service and programs with outcomes. And then long term, you have the impact. You can look at birth cohorts is often a long-term approach. Investments, return on investment is a common one. Does participating in an early childhood program, or does receiving a high quality home visiting program, prenatal and postnatal, does that have long-term impacts on post-secondary enrollment or workforce entry? So these would be more longer term questions. So what we wanted to do right now was just to think through these, get a couple of ideas. Sometimes in this work, we get so bogged down in the details that we kind of lose the imagination and like the purpose. So we wanted just to take a moment. We don't have a lot of time, obviously, but we can do a lot even in 5 minutes on this respect. So what jumps out? What would you really like to know short term? Maybe you have some big, hairy, audacious idea for long term, and everything in between.
One thing that that the Office of Early Childhood is about to embark upon is matching our children who've been in state-funded early care and education settings with their public school enrollment records. And this is something really important to us to both fulfill a data request that we have with a specific focus on New Haven, but then to really learn from that match and to be matching routinely so that we can, really understand our guiding question, which is, and how are the children, but how we can, really support children in their earliest days better with the state-funded options that we have to support them and their families.
Great. So a natural one here would be connecting those, involvement in an early care program with programs that other folks on this call right now are funding and running, right?
Absolutely.
I would say at DCF, we would want to know from a comparative perspective how are kids in foster care faring towards kids who are not, particularly in education, health, and other domains of well-being.
Excellent. Yeah. So a comparative analysis, and you really have to have a population for that, right? For comparison. I think that's a really important use of cross-sector data integration infrastructure. We have to have a comparison point, or our information doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right?
When you have labor market outcomes, I would definitely put college outcomes as well. We do some remediation, credit attainment, but then college graduation, and then also post-college graduation labor market outcomes. And I think for me, the through line here is the duration of the longitudinal studies. As our systems are getting better, I think we are, the study that Rachel referenced is actually going back to kids who applied for pre-K lottery 18 years ahead, and I think the fact that we're able to do that is because we have that kind of data that's built up. So I would say it's starting from the short term and going to the long term. They're not just individual cohorts and buckets, but how can we lengthen the duration of our studies and how far and how long we look at cohorts, because a lot of times I think impact studies look at kind of short windows, and I don't think we truly tease out all the factors that could be playing into why students are doing better or worse or whatever. So
right, and we have and I agree with the G. I mean, we have obviously labor market outcomes and college graduation outcomes by institution, but what are the what are the programmatic interventions along the way that are proving success, like regardless of the institution necessarily? Like that would be helpful, because it's sort of tied to institution, but I think sort of a lot of it's tied to sort of their K-12 education and what other interventions they received along the way. And that would be helpful for colleges to know sort of how, you know, how to address some of those needs upon entry, right?
I just wanted, Jen, for the question you asked, I'm wondering if there's specific things or examples of the type of thing you're thinking about. So to my knowledge, we haven't done as much that's looking at like how has this intervention specifically impacted it, which I could be wrong about.
So the Urban Institute did some of this, right? But it was on a smaller scale. I don't know, Jeet would remember better than I. But I just think that just looking at graduation rates is never telling the whole story, right? And so you want to know what state investments you're making that are proving success, and it's not just sending students to one institution or the other. It's obviously much more complicated than that.
And it's nested as well, right? So
right.
All of these types of analyses have to have some kind of geospatial component. What's the impact of the location versus the service? Yeah, which you can do with these data, right? I mean, that's the value of this system.
And some schools are really good at serving students with higher needs better than others, right? But you know, maybe we can call that out through this data set. Probably it might be more challenging to do that, but just knowing, I would think from your state agency perspective, sort of what interventions are leading to success, regardless of whether they went to, you know, a public or private, or, you know, setting them up for success through the interventions they receive before college would be interesting to see.
So the other thing that we like to encourage folks when going through this process, because this will be ongoing, the idea of crafting a learning agenda, is to think about like what are answers that you need to questions that you have, and also like what would you do if you had the answer. So what we want to make sure is that whatever we're asking is actionable, right? So we don't want to ask questions that we know will be a catalog of failures. We don't want to ask questions that we know we have no ability to shift. So whatever answers we receive, we want to make sure that we can, you know, we have a lever to change something to make the outcome different. So just something to keep in mind. Every single thing you mentioned just now met that criteria, right? To make it actionable, but we like to, you know, be explicit about that. All right, I'm looking at the clock. We have 4 minutes left, and I think there's 2 quick things on the agenda. So Scott, do you want us to wrap up now and just know that this will be an ongoing topic, and you know, we'll continue.
We made a tiny offline decision that if folks wanted to, the other agenda items are really like looking at the updates, and so if folks wanted to continue the discussion, we can. Otherwise, I mean, this is sort of the ongoing work, and I think it dovetails well actually with, I think, Jeff's presentation earlier. You know, he brought up topics that are items that would naturally fit on a learning agenda. What are the pain points in the behavioral health system? I think the discussion about looking at, you know, post-secondary outcomes and the relationship with mental health or mental health programs, like those are examples of the kinds of things that, you know, that can and are done in other parts of the country, and we can start doing here as well. I don't know if there's more suggestions or comments. I think this is maybe richer to discuss than the updates, or we can sort of move to that in the adjournment.
Well, process-wise, Scott, Katie, Rachel, like how do we, and also Amy, like how do we move this further, right? I mean, what do you need from the board?
I'd just say from at least my perspective, and I think Amy, you could guide us on how this is done in other places. I think the work is really, the board is, has the role is to looking at prioritizing the research agenda. And so having this discussion, understanding your agency's priorities is the key part. And then what we want to do is start to break those down into something that we could, is actionable for P20 Win, and how could we convert those into data requests. And so Deputy Commissioner Williams' suggestion, like that, how could we convert that into a data request? That are sort of sitting down with the staff at DCF to understand that in a little more detail and saying like, okay, is this a request that, you know, we could move forward, or, you know, then we need something else that's not there. But having the discussion and then starting to convert it into that request process that's already in place, I think that's sort of the at a general level, like the next step from this.
And one suggestion I can add is that you know, many folks who are here representing the executives of the agencies are also data governing board members. But I think before our next quarterly executive board meeting, there's an establishment of just an expectation that we return, having had those conversations and trying to surface some of those bigger questions to add to that learning agenda. That's something that we could continue to review at every executive board meeting. So I don't know, Scott, if you want to put a timeline on it, but I think that that could motivate action.
I should have said that too. I think this is really where there's the natural link between the executive board and the data governing board, is that sort of we're getting the sense of what the priorities are, and then the data governing board can sort of do the work to figure out what could make these actionable. And then ideally, you know, we're reporting out on progress on a regular basis about this. Thank you. I'm just gonna click through the remainder of the, I don't know, the agenda we're at.
So maybe we can make the direct action item that, you know, Katie and Scott will follow up with some kind of, you know, a form or like an email suggestion template of what to do next. I mean, I definitely think the discussion is important. And also like thinking about your buckets, like what are the big buckets? I mean, in agendas across the US right now, when I participate there, it's usually substance abuse disorder is one of the buckets. Oftentimes early childhood is a bucket. COVID impacts, of course, is a common one. So think about these cross-sector hairy problems, right, that can only be addressed holistically with cross-sector data. And then that should guide your agenda.
Thanks, Amy. Scott, we're right at time, so I want to be mindful that you have posted here, or you just had posted, I had switched to notes for a moment. Our next meeting is on February 15th, and as ever, the third Tuesday at 2 p.m. We had some other updates that we're sort of tabling for the moment. I don't think that the major action item here is contributions to the learning agenda to be revisited at our next executive board meeting. And I think given the time, we should move to adjourn. Make sense?
Yeah, I think we've circulated the updates by email, but if there's discussion that any member wants to have on them, we can do so. But otherwise, I think, yeah, the action items were reviewing the recommendations from the Children's Behavioral Health Plan, developing updates to the learning agenda, and then setting up the calendar for next year. It's not the most exciting agenda item. But.
That is calendar is important because that's how we know how to meet. So given that we've received email updates and we are at 3:01, there's not a formal move to adjourn, but thanks to Jeff and his presentation. Thank you everyone for your engagement and attendance. Also your patience. Commissioner Bai regrets that she could not be here to lead the meeting, but hopefully I've been a good substitute. And we will see the executives again, February 15th, 2022, and data governing board members again soon. Have a really happy Thanksgiving and a great rest of the week. Take care.
Thanks, Rachel,
Yep,
for facilitating. Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Have a great week.